Hi guys, today I'm going to talk about ActRaiser, an impressively experimental game originally released in 1991 for the Super Nintendo. This game offers a fairly unique blend of action platformer and god builder sim that really hasn't been attempted in the 30 plus years since, other than perhaps by the Dark Cloud series, which we may play at some point in the future. The fact the game hasn't been replicated is of particular interest. Did this blend of game styles result in an unplayable mess, or was it a fantastic niche experience? I'm looking to find out. In this video, I'll be briefly discussing the game's history, mechanics, and my first playthrough experience with it, ultimately hoping to answer the previous question and figure out if this game is still worth playing today. With that out of the way, let's get to it. Despite being brought up with the Super Nintendo, this is a game I missed completely the first time around, so when considering playing it, I really had no idea what I was getting into. I decided to do a little bit of research. The developer Quintet was founded in 1989, with ActRaiser appearing to be their first game. A cursory glance across the rest of their library didn't reveal much else of note, at least to me, other than perhaps the development support they offered on Shenmue. The game itself seemed to have performed relatively well, with game rankings, may it rest in peace, recording an aggregated score of 79%. Sales also seem to have been reasonable, with around 620,000 units reported to have been sold, predominantly in Japan and to a lesser extent the US. Alongside these cold facts came a general recommendation from the community. This isn't the perfect game by any stretch of the imagination, but it is a fairly unique experience. All of this piqued my interest, while simultaneously tempering my expectations. So what makes the game so unique? Well, it's a game of two halves, and not halves that obviously go well together. On one hand, we have a side-scrolling action game where you beat up everything that gets in your way, while overcoming increasingly more difficult platforming and combat challenges. On the other hand, you have a fairly light sim builder, where you help a number of civilizations to grow by directing their building efforts and handling emerging subplots. And then there is the glue that binds the two halves together, some RPG-light elements that essentially allow the player to get stronger in the action sections by engaging with the sim sections. Knowing all of that, my main concern going into this was around how well these systems would mesh together. I'm all for variety in games, but it has to enhance the other element in the gameplay for the variety to be worthwhile, otherwise you just end up with a mess of ideas. Before we deep dive into the playthrough, let's get the high level stuff and core mechanics out of the way. It turns out that ActRaiser has a story, or at least I think it does. It's a game from the era where most of the story was in the manual, which never really did it for me if I'm being honest, so I didn't bother to read into it more than I needed to. And that's fine, as the game doesn't really need much to work. It's basically a story of good versus evil when it comes down to it. You play as the Master, a good deity that aims to maintain peace and harmony in the world. The threat is the evil deity Tanzra, who wants chaos and world domination. You know, the usual stuff. For a time, the two coexisted and the world just kinda ticked over, and then they decided to have a big old fight.
Roar! You dare challenge me, foul beast!
And the Master lost. He raised a magic barrier to protect himself and went into seclusion to heal his many wounds, allowing the world to fall to Tanzra's influence. Fast forwarding to the start of the game, the Master has fully healed and is ready to kick some ass, but is relatively powerless to do so without a boatload of loyal worshippers. This thankfully gives us the contrivance we need for the sim side of the game. If we help build some peaceful civilizations, then we should be able to power up and take Tanzra out. The game world consists of 6 initially unpopulated regions, with Fillmore being the only one we can interact with at the start. The basic gameplay loop for each region starts with completing a side-scrolling action stage, or act, to unlock the sim mode for that region. You then need to help build up the region to the point where a new threat emerges, which we then deal with through a second act. The ultimate goal is to complete every region to give us access to the final level in a showdown against Tanzra. So first let's discuss the action side of things. The action gameplay is very simple. You can swing your sword while standing, you can swing your sword while crouching, or you can swing your sword while jumping. Movement is fairly precise, although the semi-momentum based aerial physics took a bit of getting used to. If you jump in a direction, then you aren't going to be able to change your direction mid-jump, although you can stop moving forward. And then there are a few magic spells, such as Fire and Stardust. There are a couple of others, but I never had the pleasure of using them, as Stardust is so incredibly overpowered that I never wanted to give it up. Casting a spell costs MP, which is a finite resource that is renewed at the start of each level, meaning that spell casting is to be done with caution. If you have 1 MP and cast a spell on a boss, but subsequently die, then you aren't going to get that MP back until you run out of lives, making the subsequent attempts against that boss considerably harder. And I've got mixed feelings about this, as it can be incredibly frustrating. However, it can lead to some interesting tactical considerations much later in the game, which I do appreciate. For the most part, the levels are short and simple, although it does support some minor path divergence, allowing tougher sections to be skipped and extra items to be gathered. The ultimate goal of each level is to simply get to the end and defeat the stage boss. In terms of items, there isn't much to find. You can find extra lives, temporary MP and healing. There are also some ultra rare items, namely a kill everything on screen pickup and the flame sword. The flame sword's really a horizontal beam sword, but who's being pedantic? While in the action stage you have a finite number of lives, however this number is refreshed when you start a new stage. If you die, you will be put back to the previous arbitrary checkpoint. If you run out of lives, then you'll have to start the level again without any other consequences. It's an impactful but not overly punishing system. Then there's the sim gameplay. We play as a little angel dude that can fly about and pop respawning monsters with his bow, which is a good thing as the monsters like to kidnap your citizens if given half a chance. Our main source of influence is to instruct the people where to build roads, which serves two purposes. Firstly, the people can now start automatically building houses beside these roads, allowing them to increase the local population, a complicated mechanic that I'll come back to shortly. Secondly, we can direct the roads towards monster dens, which allows the people to seal the den and stop the monsters from respawning. For any region, sealing the dens tends to be our first major goal, or else we end up having to play Guardian against the monsters indefinitely. It's not so bad when you're dealing with bats, but when you're dealing with multiple giant floating skulls every minute, your patience soon wears out. We can also take slightly more direct action by casting miracles. The simplest of these is the lightning spell, which is used to clear away trees and rocks to allow roads to be built. As we level up, we gain more SP and access to other miracles such as rain, sun, wind and earthquake. They all serve specific purposes in various regions, with wind having the added benefit of clearing enemies away to buy you time and some temporary space. The sim side of things also has my favourite mechanic in the whole game. The regions have various cross dependencies that you can unlock. Say one region needs herbs to help with the plague. Great! I have another region that produces herbs because I helped them out in some other way previously. A region has fallen to discontent. That's fine. I know a place that produces beautiful calming music. It's not overly complicated, but there's a fun web of dependencies to untangle. Anyway, as previously promised, let's get back to talking about the population mechanics in a little more detail, since they are surprisingly complicated for a game of this era. The bottom line is that each region has a hard cap on the number of people who can live there, but getting to that hard cap is based upon a number of things. First of all, you have soul count, which is basically a number related to the amount of enemies killed in action levels or on the field, and the amount of souls in the monster dens that you have sealed. You essentially gather souls from enemies and then turn them into people. No souls means no more people, regardless of any other factor. If you do want to get to the global population maximum for the region, you do need to do a bit of planning, but you should be able to get to 1 or 2 levels away from the max without any real thought. Then you have support structures, such as fields or ranches. These will get built automatically as the population requires them, so you don't have to do too much with them. Really, all you have to consider is upgrading the basic cornfields to wheat when the option becomes available, since wheat supports more people than corn. The game also makes use of a lot of artificial limiting factors to encourage you to engage with it, which I think is great. For example, your people will only build basic housing, which supports few people, until you seal the monster dens and satisfy some of their other emerging requirements. Often, there will be an emerging story in the region that stops growth until it has been resolved, such as finding a missing child or providing warm clothing. Finally, we have the RPG-like glue that binds the two halves together, and this is really quite simple, but effective. The main thing is that you gain levels and maximum health when the overall world population increases, so you are strongly incentivized to spend time growing your society. There are also a number of items found on the sim side that permanently affect the action side. For example, items that increase the number of lives and MP you have at the start of every stage. And that's pretty much ActRaiser's gameplay in a nutshell. So with all that said, let's get into the playthrough, which I'll have to go through in a slightly unorthodox order due to the fairly non-linear nature of the game. Essentially, I'll be covering it region by region rather than chronologically, so expect my character to alternate between God of All and Master of None frequently. The first act in the game's first region, Fillmore, consists of a forested area with numerous relatively weak enemies. It's a great first level though, in my opinion, as it isn't particularly tough, yet it does have some minor path branching which increases the level's dynamics. There's options near the start that allow us to avoid some mobs by taking the higher path and using some zip lines. This converges at a mini boss tree dude early on that gives me a good warm up. The boss, a spear wielding centaur, is relatively simple. He has a charging attack that we need to run away from, and a lightning attack that can hit us at close range. With a bit of care, he can be taken down though without much danger, although I did run into him a few times too many. With Fillmore freed, we swap over to our first sim section. Once we establish a small population and take out a couple of monster dens, a fire breaks out in Fillmore, which gives us the perfect chance to try out our rain spell and earn a bit of gratitude. We also get informed that there is a magic token buried under a rock in the area, granting us our first spell, a fire spell. We continue to plod on for a while until the population hits 200 and Fillmore develops a fishing industry, with the catch of the day being an MP upgrade. With only one monster den remaining, the people suddenly figure out how to build bridges, which is handy since the last den is across a river. Then the next big problem. A cavern in the ground has opened, and the people fear the evil within. It is down to us to head inside and vanquish the evil. So we attempt to do just that by descending into the Minotaur's caverns, which proves to be an incredibly frustrating experience. The level is harder than the previous, but it's easy enough and the enemies aren't much of a threat. There's some fun platforming, a mini boss offering a bit of a combat challenge, and plenty of supplies to stop this from becoming grueling. So what's the problem then? Mother heckin' insta-kill spikes that blend well with the environment, obviously. One touch and it's all over. I just hate these things. Spike pits I can work with, but random ceiling and floor spikes are just not on. Suffice to say, I got very annoyed, and that this annoyance was not limited to this level alone. The Minotaur himself is a towering mass of muscle that likes to fall from the sky on top of us while clobbering us with an axe. The basic idea is to avoid his attacks and then deliver a counter in the small window before he jumps away, but that proves too difficult at this stage. In reality, we did flee before coming back much later when we were a lot stronger, which is what you can see on screen now as we rain down hellfire onto the Minotaur via the Stardust spell, bringing him down in no time at all. From there, we head over to the next region, Bloodpool, and work our way through the first action level there. This area consists of a boardwalk type of thing, crossing a poisoned lake, with collapsing platforms and numerous enemies. None of the enemies are massive threats, thankfully. There are stone chuckers, birds, and lizards that like to throw their swords at you. I never quite worked out how to avoid getting hit every time by the lizards, but it doesn't really matter as they don't deal a lot of damage. And then we come to the boss, the Manticore. He is certainly a step up in difficulty compared to the Centaur, although still simple overall. His attack pattern involves jumping between platforms while blasting out fireballs. The attacks are easy to avoid, but they do make counter-attacking opportunities hard to find. Numerous times I attempted to attack only to catch a fireball in the face, causing me to plunge to my instant death. A few attempts later though, and it clicked. The fight was all about patience. I basically had to wait until the Manticore was in one of two positions to get an opportunity to take a few swings, then simply evade the follow-up blows without attempting to deal additional damage. It took a bit longer than I would have hoped, and it came closer than I was comfortable with, but we got there. The Bloodpool sim section isn't massively dissimilar to the previous, other than the introduction of a new enemy type, the Red Devil, and swamp tiles that need to be dried up using the sun. We proceed as previous, sealing the first enemy den until the people ask for bridge building technology. Conveniently, Fillmore provided us with this previously, so we pass it on. This allows them to cross the river and get back to sealing the monster dens. As the town gets bigger, the people reveal that they can grow wheat here, meaning we can take the technology to future regions to enhance their growth. The emerging story here involves a child called Teddy going missing. We find him in a cave, give him some bread, and get a magic skull in return. The skull can then be used to destroy an otherwise inaccessible monster den that just so happens to be the source of the lake's pollution. And our reward for our assistance? The awesome Stardust spell that will do a lot to carry us for the rest of the game. We head into a nearby castle as it seems a local monster is demanding sacrifices. This area is another fairly simple one. There's a bit of platforming involving moving or collapsing platforms. Most of the enemies are simple mobs, like the wall slimes that just need to be swiped mid-jump. The gargoyle statues are a bit more of a pain, as we need to get close to take them down. Even worse are the little skeletal imps with extending arms. There is an interesting room that alternates between light and dark, making obstacles impossible to see. It's a shame there wasn't more of this. After a final climb up through a room with timed platforms, we come face to face with the game's next boss, the Zeppelin Wolf. He is initially a spellcaster that can fire magical orbs and lightning blasts at you while moving between platforms. Both attacks are relatively easy to evade, and they can create some serious damage dealing opportunities. When he hits half health, he transforms into the Wolfman, who is an expert at walking towards you and dying. Honestly, the Magic Stardust spell simply tore him to pieces. And with him dispatched, we simply have to quell a minor rebellion using some music found in one of the other regions, unlocking a compass that can be used in a couple of places for either a permanent MP or life upgrade. Our next region is Cassandora, a desert region, with quite a long initial action stage. This stage basically involves proceeding through a desert while fending off various foes. There's a lot of sand, a lot of enemies, and some signs of previous civilization. And then there's the boss, the Goba, which is a giant sand ant monster thing. The idea is to keep smacking him in the face while avoiding his rock blasts and claw attacks. It would be trivial if not for the constantly moving sand that pushes you out of position. That being said, Stardust once again makes this fight far easier than it had any right to be. The sim section for Cassandora is a bit frustrating, in all honesty. We have to use rain to clear away a lot of sand, and it's just tedious. Sometimes less is definitely more. Not much happens here either. We get tasked with finding an unfortunately dead traveller in the desert, which unlocks the music item for Bloodpool. There's also a plague that requires herbs from elsewhere. We do finally level up to the point where we can use the Earthquake spell though, which has a few usages. In this specific region, it allows us to damage a pyramid and get an item as a reward. But more generally, it allows us to mass demolish low population housing. This means we end up with better housing, which helps get us towards the population cap for each region. The final action stage for this area is the aforementioned pyramid, and it's fine. The level setting is nice and consistent. There are some moderately tough enemies and traps that make you think a little, but that's really about it. There's almost nothing notable about this level, other perhaps than a short platforming section towards the end that took me out a couple of times. The boss too is utterly unremarkable. The Pharaoh simply flies around slowly while trying to drop on top of you, before following this up with two easy to avoid projectile attacks. He goes down with ease, once again due to Stardust. The next region for us was Morana, a swampy region consisting of multiple islands. The first act involves proceeding through a swamp and the ruins of an almost Mayan-like civilization, which is not without its challenges. Most notably, there are some totem pole-like guys that enjoy applying loads of pressure by chasing you without mercy, and some headless warriors with extendable spears. The boss for this region is Wrath Slasher, a giant plant. It has two moves that we must consider. The first is a projectile that stops in midair and lashes at you with tentacles. The other is a swamp tentacle that pursues you. The weak point is a head, and that isn't always accessible. The trick is simply to lure the swamp tentacle to the far end, jump over it, and run towards the boss to take as many attacks as you can before the tentacle catches back up. It takes a bit of time, but it's straightforward, which is great, as Stardust is pretty ineffective for a change.
20 minutes later.
The sim section for Morana is straightforward, but quite interesting. Mechanically, we need to clear trees and swamps, then use an earthquake to create a land bridge between two islands. This scores us the herbs we need to cure the Cassandoran plague. The story in this region involves our people being lured away by an evil presence in a nearby temple, which naturally means we have to raid said temple to get them back on side. And this one is quite tricky, to be honest. There's loads of traps such as spikes and electricity balls, and the enemies can be a bit frustrating to deal with. There also doesn't seem to be any healing items towards the end of the level, or at least not any I could easily access, meaning I had to go up against the boss in a fairly beaten up state. Thankfully, the level is quite short, so this restriction can be overcome. Our next boss is Kalia, a purple 6-headed cobra with some clear Hindu inspiration. Again, this guy wasn't much of a threat due to Stardust. He fires magic blasts at you, drops a platform on you, and likes to try and crush you. The attacks aren't so bad to avoid, but they don't leave much room for counter-attacking. Thankfully, this wasn't a problem for us at this stage, as we put him down and move on to the volcanic region of Aitos. The first act in this region involves scaling a mountain with the assistance of 2 doves carrying you in a basket. It's a fun change of pace that forces you to react to incoming threats from a relatively static position. At the end of the ride, we need to climb the slopes and then descend into the mountain while avoiding some vertical fireballs. After passing a section of waterfall, we find an important item for the upcoming boss, the Flame Sword. The Serpent boss is initially tough, with him flying around across the screen in all sorts of directions, making evading him tricky and landing blows even trickier. It takes a while, but I do get to grips with the pattern eventually, which just about allows me to stand in one spot for the duration and rely upon small positional adjustments and the beam sword for max damage. The region itself is quite unique in that it doesn't rely upon farming, so there is no need for wheat. The story here is also fairly thin, with it mostly involving one of our people getting himself killed while trying to seal monster layers. The cross-region reward this time is wool, which we will use in the final region to provide warm clothing. The Act 2 trigger this time involves the volcano erupting, which surprisingly doesn't actually stop anything from being built or cause any damage to the town. It does, however, cause extreme discomfort to me, the player, with its continuous annoying sound effects. This forces me to proceed into the volcano early, without the settlement being further built, potentially sacrificing an early health point or 2. The volcano is a simple and unmemorable platforming affair, with the lava being insta-death. The only notable section involves proceeding across a big old pit of death via some vertically moving platforms. The boss this time is Firewheel. He mostly bounces about or rolls across the floor, hoping to cause collision damage. There are a few projectile based attacks, but nothing that can't be avoided, and then Stardust does the job as you probably expected. So on to the final region, North Wall, a frozen hellscape. The first act in this region requires us to cross the frozen tundra, and then proceed through an ice cave, which can be genuinely quite tough. There's a lot of spike pits that you can get forced into and ceiling spikes that insta-kill you. Ugh. There's also axe-throwing enemies that do a good job of whittling you down. Thankfully, the Merman Fly boss is simple enough. While Stardust isn't terribly effective, he does have a predictable pattern that allows us to duck under him and dish out 3-hit combos from relative safety. Then we have the sim section, which kinda sucks. There is so much snow that we need to melt, and it's just tedious. There are also a load of enemies that can genuinely put you out of commission, due to how fast they move and how much damage they deal. It's slow and it's tedious, although not overly tough. And there really isn't much story either. They need warm clothing, so we provide it. Then they complain about monsters inhabiting the tree they worship, so we get to saving the tree. Climbing the tree is hard, which is a refreshing change. The enemies are tough and plentiful. The platforming isn't so bad, but you're often under pressure from the enemies while doing it, so it's not exactly easy either. There's even a fun section where you have to use bubbles to climb the tree. And then there is the boss, the Arctic Wyvern, and he doesn't half hit like a truck. He has 2 attacks. He can swoop down and across the screen, forcing you to run for dear life. Or he can hover in place while firing chunks of ice across the arena that explode with splash damage in a large area. Once again though, Stardust makes this quite straightforward. With the final Act 2 boss slain, we enter the endgame. The island of Deathheim rises from the deep, giving us access to Tanzra himself. We proceed to not engage with this and instead gather all the supplies we can possibly carry from the sim sections while getting the highest level available to us. This pays off nicely, as we're able to enter the final level with 5 lives, 5 MP, and our health bar 1 block shy of maxed out. And thank goodness we went to this effort, as the final level is an absolute nightmare. It's basically a boss rush where we have to squash all of the Act 2 bosses sequentially before facing off against Tanzra himself. This requires a complete rethink of our previous strategies. We can't afford to use our MP against the earlier bosses, as we won't get it back for Tanzra. This means we actually need to figure out how to take them all out in a straight fight, and I absolutely love this. Stardust is amazing, but I was secretly annoyed that I was able to cheese the vast majority of the bosses with it. It's great to be forced to get good sometimes. So first up we have the Minotaur, who proved to be my greatest foe. Conceptually he is simple. You just need to run away from him, turn at the last minute, then jump over his attack to land a couple of aerial blows. The timing is so finicky though. If you're too close, you get blatted. If you're too far away, you just don't land any blows. It took a while, but we got there. Next up we have the Zeppelin Wolf, which thankfully proves to be just as easy this time around. We take advantage of him being mostly stationary during attacks in the first phase, and then land blows while keeping our distance in the second phase as much as possible. Third, we have the Pharaoh, which is utterly trivial, as expected. Even when I'm completely careless, this one never really caused any threat. I'm just going to let this one play out, I think. Then we come up against the Firewheel, who can be pretty tricky if you try to engage with him head on. Instead, I found a nice safe-ish spot under a platform where I could slowly chip damage him to death. The only problem is that his rolling attacks can still hurt us, and it's not obvious when he's about to use one. I err on the side of caution, meaning that this fight becomes a bit of a slog, but a slog we can safely get through. Kalia is our next foe. This fight is simple now, but time consuming. The idea is to avoid all of the magical attacks, then when the platforms drop down we need to ride one up to deal damage. We're able to get 1 or 2 blows in before we need to retreat. The real threat here is death by old age, so let's just speed past this one. And then we have the Arctic Wyvern, who really, truly sucks. Avoiding his swooping attacks requires precise reactions, and it does afford the occasional opportunity to deal some damage, but with a lot of risk of getting hit in the process. His static blast attack is also bizarrely frustrating. It seems like a great chance to bring the pain, but in reality somehow results in me taking unnecessary blows. We whittle him down a load and then turn to Stardust to help get us across the line. Finally, after all that, we come face to face with Tanzra himself, with a decent stock of lives and MP remaining. He initially seems simple, having a relatively small health bar and us being equipped with the flame sword. The fight consists of avoiding an energy blast storm until his head drops down to the ground so that we can deal damage. He has a direct attack, but it's easy enough to avoid. He retreats, and we repeat this cycle a few times until he is defeated, by which I mean he transitions into a massive skeletal space dragon abomination phase. Naturally, the real fight starts here. It is still quite simple though. He fires out energy blasts that we can avoid through some simple positioning, which affords us a small window to counter-attack. We lay into his rather obvious weak spot until he fires another blast our way, which we have to duck under or take huge damage. He then releases 4 homing energy balls, and this gets a little bit tough as you end up with a lot of things on screen that you have to deal with at once. But Stardust comes in clutch. It does practically nothing to the boss, but it does a pretty good job of clearing the worst of the homing attacks, affording us the space we need to bring the pain. We do run out of magic before he falls, but with some grit and determination we are able to push on to victory, defeating Tanzra and finishing the game. And our reward for all of our effort? The world's longest monologue summarising what is going on in the game world. I mean seriously, this thing is like 10 minutes long, and it basically boils down to us having saved the day, and the people having started moving on from needing a god. Hurrah! So, with the playthrough over, all we really need to do now is decide if the game is still worth playing. And look, I've spoken enough, so I'm not going to draw this out too much more. I really enjoyed myself, and found the mix of styles to be brilliant. It wasn't a perfect game, or even close to the top of the pile for me, but it was an experience I'm glad I had. I might be saying something different if it had taken me more than the 5 or 6 hours it did, but for that time investment, I'm satisfied. The game was tough at points, but that gave you a good excuse to engage with it further, to power yourself up and make it more manageable. The end game boss rush in particular offered a wonderful challenge that I'm glad to have had. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's nowhere near the toughest game of the era, but it did enough to scratch that challenge itch. That being said, I don't think I'll be revisiting ActRaiser in years to come. It was an experimental game that missed the mark at times, particularly around the pacing and lack of depth in the sim side of things. Still, if I've done enough to pique your interest, I think you owe it to yourself to at least try this one out. For me, the ultimate testament is that I would really like to see more games like this in the future.